They said I ruined everything. Then they handed me the eviction notice on my birthday. The table was dressed in yellow tulips and fine linen, but the air felt tight like the breath before a storm. Margot had arranged everything. Of course she had. Her cutlery gleamed, her mimosas sparkled, and her smile. That smile was painted on like the frosting on the cake she didn't bother to bake herself. I set down the wine I brought on sale screw cap and caught the quick twitch of her lip. Disapproval precise and measured. "Happy birthday, Rachel," she said, leaning in for an air kiss that never landed. 35. A woman's prime. I smiled with my teeth. "Thank you, Margot." Richard sat at the head of the table, eyes skimming the morning newspaper like it mattered more than me. His silence had grown roots over the years, deeper, colder. Megan played with her fork, tracing circles into the tablecloth. Logan, Margot's son, scrolled through his phone, half present as always. No one mentioned my name. No one asked about work or the cabin upstate or the art classes I started teaching again. Just idle talk of weather and taxes. After the cake lemon, my least favorite Margot dabbed the corners of her mouth with a napkin and reached under the table. "We do have a little something else for you," she said. Her voice was syrupy, but her eyes were steel. She slid a white envelope across the linen. "Here's the agreement. The house isn't yours anymore." For a moment, I just stared at it. I didn't touch it. I didn't speak. Megan looked away. Logan glanced up and said flatly, "She overstayed anyway." I turned to Richard. He didn't blink, didn't even put the paper down. The man who once taught me to build tree houses couldn't meet my eyes. "Excuse me." My voice was even quieter than I felt. Margot sipped her mimosa. "It's all very standard. A formal transfer. You see, the deed was never truly in your name. You've been caretaking in a sense." "My mother bought this house," I said. "She did. And then she passed." "And now things evolve," Margot said. "Your father and I have decided to transfer full ownership to Megan. She and Connor will be starting a family soon. You're not exactly in that phase." My hand instinctively reached for the emerald ring on my finger, the one Mom had given me on my 18th birthday. I twisted it once, twice. Its edges bit into my skin, a small reminder that I was still here. "Why today?" I asked. Margot tilted her head. "Because birthdays are a time for new beginnings." She said it like it was a blessing. Like betrayal could be gift-wrapped and delivered with brunch. Megan opened her mouth finally, but no words came out. She closed it again, eyes wide with guilt. I wanted to shout, to demand an explanation, to ask if this was what family meant to them. But I remembered what Mom once said. The ones who smile at your table might be the first to steal your plate. I stood slowly. No one moved. No one rose with me. Richard flipped a page. Logan went back to scrolling. Margot added almost gently, "Your name was never on the deed, Rachel. You're mourning something that was never yours." That was the part that gutted me, not the legality, not the logistics, but the certainty in her tone. As if my life here had been some imagined grace. As if I had been squatting in memories I had no right to claim. No one offered to walk me out. I didn't ask. Outside, the Oregon rain had started again, soft but steady. I stepped into it without a coat, without turning back. As Rachel steps into the rain, she smiles faintly. The ring is still on her finger. I left with nothing but my car keys and a diamond-shaped ache lodged behind my ribs. The car door slammed shut with more finality than I intended. Rain streaked the windshield, blurring the mansion's outline behind me until it looked more like a memory than a house. I didn't cry, not yet. The tears hadn't figured out how to surface. I just drove headlights cutting through the gray Oregon mist, letting the silence settle where words couldn't. At the red light, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. Pale blank, unmoored. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't pack a bag. My wallet held $14 in expired coupons. My phone buzzed with an alert I ignored. For the first time in years, I had no place to return to. I passed familiar roads that didn't feel familiar anymore. Every corner of this town now bore fingerprints I didn't trust. When I turned onto Route 9, I didn't think I just followed instinct. Or maybe memory. I wasn't sure which was louder. A rickety gas station blinked ahead like a forgotten lighthouse. I pulled in and cut the engine, letting the rain drum against the roof in tired rhythm. The place was nearly deserted. A dusty soda machine wheezed near the door, and the pump hoses looked like they hadn't seen a car in weeks. Beyond the gas station, just past the edge of the gravel lot, I could see the lake. Silver, still eternal. I stared out at the water, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. And I remembered. I was 9. My mother and I had been sitting in the back of her truck watching the sunset ripple across the lake's surface. She pointed across the water to a small A-frame tucked between the trees. "Someday," she said, "that'll be yours. Your place to breathe." I had laughed, thinking she meant it like a story, like a dream. I hadn't thought of that cabin in years. Suddenly, I needed to hear a voice that wasn't trying to gut me with politeness. I grabbed my phone and called the only person who hadn't stood me up emotionally in a decade. "Celeste," I said when she answered. A pause, then warm sarcasm. "Well, look who remembered I exist. I thought you were still living in that palace with the golden sinks." I let out a shaky breath. "Not anymore." There was silence, then softness. "Where are you?" "Near the lake," I murmured. She whistled. "Wow. Throwback. Is this a nostalgia trip or a breakdown? Does it matter?" She laughed, but it was kind. "Rachel." What happened? I couldn't say the words out loud. Not yet. I just said, "Do you remember the cabin my mom used to point out? The one with the green shutters? That old thing still standing? I don't know." I swallowed. "I'm going to find out." I hung up before I could talk myself out of it. My fingers gripped the wheel again tighter this time. I remembered something else. Something quieter. When Mom passed, her will was clear. The lake cabin was listed solely in her name. But Richard never acknowledged it. He called it unimportant, a crumbling shack with no future. But I remembered every summer night spent there, the squeaky floors, the lilac soap she kept in the bathroom, the book she underlined with red pen. It wasn't just a cabin. It was her. It was mine. I drove the last 10 miles in silence, windows fogging at the edges. The gravel road up to the cabin was worse than I remembered, half washed away and riddled with fallen branches. When I finally turned the corner, my breath caught. The cabin was still there, a little more slanted, a little more weathered, but standing. I parked at the edge of the empty driveway and stepped out into the soaked earth. I climbed the porch steps, heart pounding. I reached for the doorknob. Locked. A thick padlock hung from the latch, new, shiny, uninvited. Someone had been here. Recently. I froze. Was it abandoned? Claimed? Who else even knew it existed? I backed away, eyes scanning the porch, searching for any echo of my mother. And then I remembered she used to hide a spare key under the 3rd step. Said it was our little secret. I dropped to my knees, rain soaking through my jeans, and reached under the rotting plank. She reaches under the porch steps where her mother used to hide a spare key. It's still there. The cabin smelled like cedar and broken promises sealed in dust. The scent hit me the second I stepped through the door. Sharp, earthy, and so achingly familiar, it made my knees weak. It was like stepping back into a room preserved by time, or maybe by longing. The curtains were moth-eaten, but intact. The hearth was cold, a pile of ashes, undisturbed since when I didn't know. Everything felt like it was waiting for me. The key had still been there, buried under the 3rd step like it never moved. That meant something. That meant Mom wanted me to return. This wasn't coincidence. It was a map. I wandered barefoot through the main room, tracing the frame of the windows, the cracked table, the slight tilt of the wooden floor. It had been over a decade since I'd set foot here, and yet every inch whispered her name. I began to clean not out of obligation, but to reclaim space. I opened the windows, swept the floor, wiped down the old counters with the hem of my shirt. My limbs moved like they remembered how to belong here, even if my heart didn't. Near the fireplace, one of the floorboards creaked differently underfoot, a hollow sound. I paused, kneeling, to press my fingers against the warped wood. With a quick pry of a butter knife I'd found in the drawer, the plank lifted, revealing a small wooden box nestled inside the gap. The moment I touched it, I knew it was hers. The latch gave with a soft click. Inside was a folded piece of paper, aged and fragile. My mother's handwriting stared back at me, looped, confident, unmistakably hers. Rachel, if you're reading this, they've taken something from you. Maybe not all at once. Maybe they were clever. But I know how they operate. That house was meant for you. The savings account I built over years yours. Even the condo downtown, the one I put in Richard's name, only because I was advised to mine to give and I chose you. Don't let them convince you otherwise. Love, Mom, I couldn't breathe. I sat down hard on the dusty floor, the letter trembling in my hands. I read it twice, then a third time. The words didn't change. She had left it all for me. Not Margot. Not Megan. Me. Tears came hot and relentless. I hadn't cried at the mansion. Not when they handed me the envelope. Not even when Logan said I'd overstayed. But here, I let it crash over me. Because it wasn't just grief. It was betrayal. Layered, deliberate, cold. I folded the letter back into the box and noticed another document tucked beneath. It was a copy of an older will dated nearly 6 years ago. In it, my mother named me as the sole beneficiary. The cabin, the condo, the savings. All mine. But then I saw the footnote. Superseded. Replaced by a newer version a year before her death. No explanation, no signature on the update, just a notation. My stomach turned. Had someone tampered with it? Pressured her. Was this Margot's doing? Richard's? Both. I stood slowly, as if rising from the weight of buried years. My palm instinctively went to the emerald ring on my finger. The stone caught the morning light like a watchful eye. I needed help. Not memories, not metaphors. I grabbed my phone and called Celeste. "Are you okay?" she asked, voice rough with sleep. I found something. A letter from my mom and an old will. She meant everything for me. "Rachel," she said carefully, "old letters won't hold in court. You need a lawyer, not just paper from a box." "I know," I whispered, fingers tightening around the edge of the table. "But it's a start," she sighed. "Send me a picture. I'll ask around." "Thanks," I said. But my voice didn't sound like mine. It was older, sharper. I hung up and stared out the cabin window, the lake gleaming like quiet steel. The air smelled like rain and reckoning. She texts Celeste. "Know anyone ruthless with a conscience? I need legal teeth." Danica Pierce wore stilettos and fury like war paint. She entered the cafe like it owed her money. I was already seated at a booth near the window, hands curled around a lukewarm cup of black coffee, stomach tight with nerves. She didn't smile, didn't wave, just slid into the seat across from me, flicked her coat behind her like a cape, and said, "Show me what you've got." I reached into my bag with fingers that betrayed the steadiness I was trying to fake. The letter, the old will, the photos. I laid them on the table like fragile relics, afraid she might laugh or scoff. She did neither. Danica's eyes flicked over each page like a scanner. No reaction, no surprise. Her nails were painted the color of dried blood. Her brow barely moved. Then finally she said, "This could work." I exhaled just a little. "You think it's enough?" "No," she replied without pause. "But it's a start. We don't need to prove theft. That's the wrong angle. What we need is to prove manipulation." Her voice was low, steady. The kind of voice that didn't rise even in court because silence was scarier than shouting. She tapped the edge of the older will. "This version names you as sole beneficiary. The fact that a new will appeared a year before her death doesn't surprise me. What surprises me is the lack of explanation. That's your opening." I nodded slowly. My mother wasn't careless. If she changed her will, she would have said something. Documented it. Danica looked up. "Exactly. But the update is vague. No witness signatures, no attorney's notation. It's legally weak, even if it's registered." I felt my pulse quicken. "You think someone forged it? Maybe. Or maybe someone pushed her to revise it under duress. Either way, we can build a case. But I need more. Was there anything unusual around that time? Hospitalization, a sudden trip, anything I thought back? She got quiet. I remember that. She stopped calling. And then one day, Megan told me she was in good hands. I wasn't allowed to visit her. Danica's mouth flattened into a line. That's something. I pulled out a second folder from my tote. These are letters she wrote to me, handwritten. See the loops? That's her style. I also have photos of her writing at the cabin desk. Maybe for a handwriting expert, she took them without comment and slid everything into a leather portfolio. Then she leaned forward. I need full access, she said. Text messages, emails, your mother's medical records if you can get them. Every scrap. If they buried something, we'll dig it out. Her tone didn't allow for hesitation. For the first time in days, I felt anchored. Not safe, not whole, but seen. Why are you helping me? I asked. Danica sat back and folded her arms. Celeste said you were the kind of woman who doesn't ask for help unless it's life or death. I respect that. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a business card. This is my personal line. If you breathe near a subpoena, call me. I took it, thumb brushing the embossed lettering. I thought lawyers like you didn't take cases this personal. She smirked. I don't. But I hate bullies. We sat in silence for a moment. The waitress approached, but Danica waved her off with a flick of her fingers. Her phone buzzed once. She glanced down, expression unreadable, then stood. I'll be in touch. And, Rachel? Her eyes narrowed slightly. You're not crazy, but we'll have to make them look like liars. She walked away before I could say thank you. I stared out the window, watching the reflection of myself in the glass. I didn't recognize the woman sitting there. She looked sharper, hungrier, as if grief had been peeled back to expose something harder underneath. My phone buzzed. I expected it to be Celeste, but the message said I didn't know you'd come back. Megan. People think walls can't talk, but they echo what the living tried to bury. The wind outside howled like a warning, sweeping through the trees that framed the lake. I sat cross-legged on the floor of the cabin, surrounded by dusty folders and brittle paper that smelled of mildew and memory. The filing cabinet creaked like it resented my intrusion. Maybe it did. Maybe it had kept its secrets too long and wasn't ready to let them go. But I was done waiting. I pulled another stack of papers out, coughing at the swirl of dust that followed. Most were insurance documents, utility bills from the early 2000s, and one faded grocery list scribbled in my mother's sharp, angular handwriting. I traced my fingers across the ink. She used to put hearts over her lowercase i's. That detail gutted me more than I'd expected. The bottom drawer refused to budge. I pulled harder. It groaned, then popped open in a sudden jerk that sent a few envelopes tumbling to the floor. One folder was torn and half tucked behind the back panel. That was the one I reached for. Inside a ledger. A series of transfers neatly itemized quarterly. Amounts in the thousands. The recipient, Ellison Family Holdings. My breath stopped. I read it again. Same name, same account. Payment after payment from my mother's account long before she died, long before the second will. Each line a quiet betrayal, cleanly typed, no fuss, no explanation. I scanned the pages using the app Danica had installed on my phone. My hand shook, but the autofocus held steady. I hit send before I could overthink it. Her reply came less than a minute later. This reeks of asset siphoning. Maybe fraud. I stared at those words. Asset siphoning. Fraud. Words that used to belong to documentaries and crime shows. Now, they were mine. The phone buzzed again. This time, a different name on the screen. Megan. If I talk, will you keep me out of it? That sentence sat on the screen like bait. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I stood, stretched the tightness out of my shoulders, and lit the fire in the old stove. The cabin filled with the scent of cedar smoke and the crackle of warmth. Outside, the moon carved silver lines across the lake. Inside, my hands were finally warm but not soft. I took out my journal. Not for therapy. For strategy. I began to write. When did the payments start? Was Richard involved? Did Margot use her son's LLC to hide it? Where was I when they were shifting her money? I flipped to a blank page and scribbled in all caps, "This is where they buried her wishes." The pen pressed hard enough to leave indents in the next 3 pages. I thought of my mother again, her voice soft, but never weak, her way of speaking in unfinished thoughts and pointed glances. I remembered how she never argued when Margot took over dinner or when Richard began calling the cabin a burden. She had fought in silence, died in silence, but she had left a trail, and I had just found it. I returned to Megan's message. She hadn't followed up. No threats, no apologies, just one line loaded with implication. I typed back, "Depends what you know." Then I waited. 5 minutes. 10. Still no reply. I set the journal down and curled up in the armchair by the window, watching the trees sway. Part of me wanted to drive to Portland, bang on every lawyer's door, shove the files into the faces of anyone who'd listen. But Danica was right. This had to be methodical, documented, precise. So I sat still, watching fire and shadows and fog move like ghosts in the room. It wasn't fear anymore. It was fuel. My phone lit up again. "Danica," I answered before the second ring. "Rachel," she said, her voice sharper than usual, "you just gave us a case. We had 10 days to strike or they'd bury the truth in legal paperwork." Danica's office smelled like toner and unfinished battles. Everything inside was white walls, chairs, even her coffee mug. The only color came from stacks of manila folders labeled in neat black Sharpie, arranged like silent explosives. She didn't offer me coffee, just a seat and war. She clicked a pen and said, without looking up, "We'll start with an injunction. Immediate motion to freeze all financial activity tied to the revised will. If we wait, Margot will move the assets into an offshore trust and we'll never see a dime again." I sat down slowly. My palms were damp, the affidavit pages beneath them already curling. My name sat at the top in stark print. Rachel Caldwell. Underneath petitioner. A word that made my spine straighten and my mouth go dry. "Once you sign Danica continued, you're no longer a spectator. You're the one throwing the first punch." I picked up the pen. My fingers shook. "Scared?" she asked, finally meeting my eyes. "More like awake." She gave a small approving nod. "Good. Fear means you understand what's coming. Arrogance is what buries most people." I signed. Danica snatched the paper the second the ink dried, then handed me a second stack. "Deposition outline. We'll prep your testimony next week. But you need to start writing everything down. Dates, conversations, even what you overheard. If it comes to court, they'll try to paint you as emotional and unstable. We counter with precision." My phone buzzed. "Megan. I meant what I said, but I can't talk yet." I showed Danica the screen. She barely blinked. "She's bait," she said. "Margot's playing emotional chess. Don't let guilt soften your spine." "But what if she really?" Danica held up a hand. "Let her come to us when she's ready. Until then, you need to treat her silence as strategy, not weakness." The office clock ticked in sync with the mounting dread in my chest. 10 days. That was the window. Not 10 months. Not someday. Just 10 days before the paperwork. The deeds, the trusts, all got buried in procedural concrete. Danica pulled a red folder from the bottom of the stack and opened it. "Here's the counterclaim. Once we file this, you're not hiding in the shadows anymore." Her hand hovered over the page for emphasis. "This makes it real." The room grew smaller as she slid the paper across the table to me. I read the header, "Counterclaim, Rachel Caldwell versus the estate of Eleanor Caldwell." Revised, everything felt still. I was suing the very document that was supposed to protect me. Danica rose from her chair and placed both palms flat on the table. "Rachel, you're not crazy, but we'll have to make them look like liars." "I'm ready," I said, and I almost believed it. Almost. When I got home to the cabin, dusk had bled across the lake, and a single certified envelope waited on my doorstep. No return address, but the seal told me enough. Inside, a motion to dismiss. Claiming the petitioner me was mentally compromised and emotionally unstable, driven by resentment rather than fact. As if mourning disqualified truth. as if I hadn't seen them tear apart my mother's legacy with manicured hands. The page shook in my grip as I reached for my phone. But I didn't call Danica. Not yet, because before the rage, before the panic, there was something deeper, something quieter, a single thought curling like smoke. They were terrified enough to call me crazy, and that meant I was finally dangerous. They called me unstable. I answered with receipts. The courthouse records office smelled like old toner and policy defeat. Danica moved like she'd been here before, sharp heels on cracked linoleum trench coat, swinging like she was marching to war. I trailed behind her with a folder clutched to my chest, half wishing I could disappear inside the beige walls. The public clerk barely glanced up. Property filings. Lane 3. He grunted. Danica didn't wait. She flashed her credentials like a weapon, and within 5 minutes we were seated in a private booth with a stack of tax records, ownership transfers, and a battered file labeled Caldwell Estate of. She pulled one document free, skimmed it with narrowed eyes, then slid it across the table to me. Read that, she said. Tell me what's wrong. I did. The downtown condo reassignment dated 6 weeks before Mom's last hospitalization had my mother's name, her signature, except it wasn't her. The slant was off. The pressure faded in the first few letters like someone trying too hard to mimic the stroke. Danica leaned in, tapping the curve of the C. Your mom's signature always curled here. This one doesn't. They either traced it or used a template. Either way, this is forgery. My stomach sank. So they lied. Officially. Danica's lips curled slightly. They did. And we're going to make that lie public. The clerk returned with more folders. You want the digitals? He asked Danica. Send them, she replied, already standing. To my firm. You have the address. Outside, I hugged my coat tighter as we walked down the steps into chilled March air. The sun still hadn't broken through the clouds, and the city felt gray, damp, and merciless. Then I saw her. Margot standing across the street next to a Silvertown car, speaking calmly into her phone. Her expression was unreadable, but her presence wasn't an accident. She was there to be seen. She wanted me to know she wasn't scared. Danica followed my gaze. She's posturing. Ignore it. But I couldn't. I stared straight back long enough for her to pause mid-sentence. She lowered her sunglasses slightly, just a blink, and looked away. Good, Danica said. Let her wonder what we know. On the drive back, I made a detour. Behind the old pharmacy, where Mom used to buy her supplements, was a sheriff's station, a squat building with a worn American flag and a drop box for anonymous evidence. I slipped in a manila envelope the scan of the forged deed, the tax history, and a note that simply read, Possible fraud, see attached. I didn't sign it, but I made sure it was crisp legible, and time to land before Margot could rewrite history again. That night, back at the cabin, I sat by the stove and watched the fire curl around the wood like it knew what it was burning. I held Mom's emerald ring between my fingers and stared at the notebook in my lap. I wrote, Day 7. First blow landed. Danica called just past 10. Discovery's been filed, she said. They'll get the notice in the morning. That includes the reassignment and request for handwriting analysis. Will it hold if the judge is half awake? Yes, she said. And Margot's lawyer just filed for an extension. That's the first crack. What does that mean? It means she's nervous. They never ask for time unless they're scrambling. I stayed on the line, breathing in the silence. Then I said, Thank you. Danica replied, Don't thank me yet. They'll fight back harder. I hung up and opened my messages. Celeste had sent a screenshot Margot's calendar visible from some leaked office portal. One entry, now canceled, was circled in red estate planning review, 9:00 a.m. Thursday. Below it, Celeste wrote, Margot just canceled a meeting with her estate lawyer. That's not like her. Margot loved money more than people. That would be her undoing. The rain tapped like urgent fingers against the windows of Danica's office. Outside, thunder grumbled low and mean like it had a grudge. Inside, the glow from 2 monitors painted Danica's cheekbones in cold light. I sat across from her, stiff in my chair, arms folded tight against the nausea of exhaustion. We'd been at it for hours, sifting through ledgers, flash drives, and old statements my mother had squirreled away in a locked filing cabinet labeled "just in case." Danica didn't speak unless she had to. That made everything she did say feel like a gavel drop. She tapped a line on the spreadsheet with the eraser end of her pencil. Ellison Family Holdings, same name we found in the cabin records. I stared at the transfer history on screen. That's my mother's emergency account. She opened it when I was 16. She told me to never tell Dad. She was smart, Danica muttered. Too bad trust doesn't run in the family. We tracked a dozen wire transfers. $500 here, $12,000 there. Quiet, regular movements that ended up in a shell account under Margot's family name. What made my stomach turn wasn't the amount. It was the timestamp on the first transaction 1 week after Mom's diagnosis. I clenched the arms of the chair until the leather groaned. "You okay?" Danica asked without looking up. "I don't know what's worse," I said. That she did it, or that she was waiting for the moment Mom couldn't stop her. Her eyes finally met mine. What's worse is letting her get away with it, which we're not. The printer spat out pages like Spitfire, the motion to compel already formatted. Danica scribbled notes with surgical precision. On the margins, she added references to the fraud statutes and inheritance misrepresentation. She worked like someone who didn't believe in small victories. My phone buzzed. Megan's name appeared this time with something different than silence. I didn't sign those. She forged my initials. No greeting, no explanation, just that. I showed it to Danica. "She's folding!" Danica said, already downloading the message and attaching it to the affidavit. "Label her a potential cooperative witness. Not fully reliable, but enough to rattle Margot's legal team." "She's scared," I murmured. "She should be. But don't mistake fear for morality." The lights flickered as thunder clapped closer. Danica stood smoothing her blazer like a general ready for the front lines. She handed me the motion to compel. This forces Margot to submit her financial disclosures for the past 7 years. All bank accounts, all transfers, all assets. And if she refuses, I asked. "She won't," Danica said. "She's too arrogant. She'll try to outsmart the system, and that's when we catch her." My palms were damp as I signed at the bottom of the motion. My name looked shaky on paper, but I felt steadier inside. Every document, every attachment, every click was a stitch holding my future together. We drove to the courthouse in silence. The storm had turned the streets into reflective ribbons of water, neon lights blurring in the wet. Danica marched up the courthouse steps like she owned them. I trailed behind, gripping my umbrella in the manila folder like both could shield me from the weight of what we were doing. Inside, the clerk accepted the paperwork with a polite nod. Time-stamped. Official. The trap was set. We returned to Danica's office past midnight. The room smelled like ink and tired ambition. She poured herself a glass of water, then turned to me with a strange half-smile, sharp at the edges, tired in the center. By Friday, she said, we'll know exactly how deep she's buried herself. If they couldn't silence me legally, they'd smear me publicly. The first message came from a distant cousin I hadn't spoken to in years, saw the article. "Hope you're okay." No link, no explanation. Just a vague wave of concern that felt more like a fishing line cast into choppy water. I opened my browser. I shouldn't have. An anonymous blog post headlined, "Grief or Greed, the Fight Over a Dead Woman's Legacy." My name was in the third sentence. The piece painted me as a manipulative daughter, estranged for years now emerging from obscurity to claim properties she never earned. Below that, a photo I didn't know existed me, stepping out of the courthouse in a black blazer and heels. The caption read, "Vulture in Heels." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Celeste called before I could dial her. "Rach, don't look. Whatever you do, don't scroll through the comments." Too late? I had already seen the top one. This is what happens when gold diggers don't get cut into the will. Danica's voice cut through my panic later that afternoon. I had barely gotten 2 words in before she said, "Let them yell. They're afraid. This is noise, and it's meant to make you flinch." I didn't flinch, not outwardly, but inside something fractured. I paced the cabin floor, unsure whether to cry or scream or disappear. Instead, I logged out of everything: Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. I deleted my Twitter. I turned off all notifications. Then I grabbed my journal, opened a fresh page, and wrote, "Let them shout. I'll whisper with evidence." Still, the damage lingered. Whispers slithered through the family tree like snakes. Aunt Lorraine called Megan to ask, "Is it true? Your sister forged a will?" Megan didn't respond to me, but I could feel her silence growing heavier by the hour. Margot didn't need her to say anything, just to stay quiet. Danica pulled me into another strategy meeting, this one held entirely over encrypted chat. "This isn't just slander," she typed. "It's tactical. They're buying time. If we chase headlines, we stop chasing their fraud." I wanted to believe her, but it felt personal now. Like Margot had crawled into my skin and was poking around for all my softest spots. On the third day, I found myself standing in front of my mother's cedar dresser at the cabin, staring at my own reflection in the mirror above it. My mother's scarf was draped across the edge. I picked it up and pressed it to my face. "What would you say now?" I whispered. She wouldn't have answered with comfort. She would have answered with action. That night, I began scanning old journals, receipts, letters, anything I could use. If they wanted to say I was lying, I'd show the truth in ink and timestamps. Then came the package. It arrived without a return address, dropped in the mailbox like a ghost's offering. Inside, wrapped in plain brown paper, was a medical bill from 5 months before my mother died. Final hospitalization charges. Paid in full. Signed not by me. Signed by Margot. I sat down on the porch steps, the weight of the paper pressing into my hands. Margot had signed on behalf of the estate, while my mother was still alive. The line between grief and anger blurred again. My hands trembled, but this time not with fear, with clarity. I took a photo of the document, scanned it into my archive, and wrote a new entry in my journal. If she handled the end, she thinks she owns the story. Inside, Danica's message pinged. That signature could be a bomb. Let's see who flinches when we drop it in discovery. I looked out across the lake, cold wind prickling the water like static. They wanted me gone. But now, I was starting to enjoy the quiet. A package arrives at the cabin inside a copy of her mother's final medical bill signed by Margot, not Rachel. I took off the ring before I signed the papers. Not to give up, but to return as someone they couldn't ignore. The air in Danica's conference room was sharp with the scent of old paper, fresh toner, and focused tension. The windows reflected the gray sweep of Portland's skyline, but the room itself felt insulated, like a war bunker with legal pads and coffee mugs instead of grenades. Across the long mahogany table, Danica spread out the exhibits like pieces of an intricate, ruthless puzzle. This wasn't theory anymore. It was strategy in motion. "We're filing everything as one master claim," she said without looking at me. "The medical bill, the condo reassignment, Megan's texts, the emergency account." She tapped her pen against the affidavit. "Each piece links. Alone, they suggest carelessness. Together, manipulation." I nodded, though my body felt strangely detached, like I was watching myself in a courtroom sketch. I touched the emerald ring on my right hand, my mother's ring, a piece of her that felt like armor. For a moment, I tightened my grip, then slowly slipped it off. I didn't want sentiment guiding my signature. Danica caught the motion. "You ready?" "No," I whispered. "But I'm doing it anyway." The affidavit was cold to the touch. 4 pages of concise, unforgiving language. Legal phrases curled around my name like vines. Intent to misappropriate, pattern of concealment, violation of fiduciary duty. I signed each line with deliberate strokes, slow and steady. I imagined Margot reading them. I imagined the tremor in her perfectly manicured hand. Then my phone buzzed. A voicemail. From my father. Danica saw my hesitation. "You don't have to." "I do," I said. I played it on speaker. Richard's voice, once firm and commanding, now dragged like tired rope across stone. "Rachel, this has gone too far. This isn't who we are. Your mother." He paused. She wouldn't want it like this. You've made your point. Now stop, before it's worse for everyone. He ended the message there. No goodbye, just a wall of silence meant to feel like concern. Danica didn't flinch. He's trying to guilt you into folding. Standard tactic. When facts don't work, they weaponize family. I nodded but said nothing. My throat was tight. As dusk rolled in, I returned to the cabin with the signed documents clutched in my bag. The sky bled orange and pink over the lake, the kind of sunset my mother used to call God's apology for a hard day. I stepped onto the porch feeling the wood creak beneath my feet. Everything felt heavier now, but not in a crushing way. It was the weight of becoming someone who no longer whispered apologies into her own silence. I took the ring from my coat pocket and held it up to the fading light. Its green shimmer caught the fire in the sky. I didn't put it back on. I set it beside my journal, open to a blank page. I wrote, "Tomorrow I stop surviving. I start reclaiming." Inside, my phone buzzed again, Danica's name flashing across the screen. I answered. "Filed and time-stamped," she said. "They'll feel it." Margot's attorney already called. He wants a private meeting, meaning she said he smelled smoke. I stepped back inside, hands steady for the first time in weeks. We weren't just chasing ghosts anymore. We were building a case loud enough that even the dead would stir. I fell asleep early that night, curled under the same blanket I once used as a child, when Mom and I would escape here, hiding from the noise of Richard's new life. I dreamt of her standing on the lake dock, wind in her hair, pointing toward the horizon. When I woke, the world was still, quiet in the way only truth can make it. I brewed coffee, opened my laptop to check the case docket, and saw it. Hearing scheduled, June 14th, 9:00 a.m., Probate Courtroom 4B. The courtroom smelled like paper power and fear. Most of it wasn't mine. I stepped into Courtroom 4B as if it were a frozen theater, each pew of wooden benches occupied by watchers pretending to be neutral. The air was heavy with judgment long before the gavel struck. Narrow morning light cut through the high windows like a scalpel, slicing the room into cold, deliberate halves, ours and theirs. Danica walked beside me, her stilettos unapologetic on the marble floor. I could feel the tension of 100 whispered stories stretching between us and the gallery. Some were probably family, others just curious vultures. My heart pounded a rhythm I pretended not to hear. Margot sat in the front with her attorney, immaculate in pearl earrings and a blazer too white to mean peace. She turned slightly as I passed, her lips curling upward into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a glance. Instead, I walked past like she was air and just as irrelevant. I took my seat beside Danica at the petitioner's table, our stack of exhibits precise and unflinching. Behind us, I caught a flicker of movement. Megan. She sat in the gallery's last row, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. I wasn't sure if she came to watch the storm or shield herself from it. Judge Kelly entered, robed and stern face, unreadable except for the slight twitch near his left eye. A tic I'd come to know meant irritation. He took his seat, looked briefly at each side, and nodded. Danica stood first. Her voice was low, calm, surgical. "Your Honor, what we present today is not speculation. It is not bitterness. It is a chain of documented actions taken without legal authority. My client, Rachel Caldwell, submits evidence of forged signatures on real estate documents, suppression of a prior will, and unauthorized financial withdrawals totaling over $200,000 redirected to accounts tied to the respondent's family business." She placed the first exhibit on the table. The medical bill. Margot's attorney stood with theatrical exhaustion. "Your Honor, opposing counsel's statements are designed to provoke. Miss Caldwell, my client's stepdaughter, has a well-documented history of estrangement, emotional volatility, and unresolved grief regarding her late mother's estate. Her motivations, I submit, are driven by resentment, not righteousness." I didn't flinch. Neither did Danica. "The court will consider both motive and material," Judge Kelly replied evenly. "But for now, proceed." We moved through the evidence slowly, each document a quiet nail in Margot's carefully crafted coffin. The forged condo deed. The message from Megan stating she hadn't signed off on transfers. The dated journal page with my mother's handwriting referencing the cabin as Rachel's future. When Danica presented the bank records, the ones tracing the emergency account to Ellison Family Holdings, Margot finally shifted in her seat. Her attorney cleared his throat too loudly. Judge Kelly tilted his head. Counselor, your client authorized medical treatment posthumously. Can you explain how? There it was. The tremor. Margot's attorney fumbled with his folder, then muttered, there was confusion during that period. Documents were signed in good faith. Good faith. Danica echoed dryly. Doesn't override probate law. I could see it a fissure in the polished marble of Margot's composure. Her posture tensed just slightly. She reached for a bottle of water and sipped with care, as though every movement now had to be calculated. When the hearing broke for recess, Judge Kelly announced he would review materials over the weekend and reconvene next week to decide on the motion to freeze remaining assets. I stood knees tight, but firm, heart pounding. Outside the courthouse, the air was thick with Portland's June heat and the tension of half-finished battles. Danica stayed behind to file follow-up documents. I needed air. I needed sky. I walked down the courthouse steps slowly, letting the sunlight hit my face like absolution, and then I heard footsteps. Rachel. I turned. Megan stood a few feet away, wringing her hands, her purse clutched tightly to her side. Her voice was small, almost apologetic. I think I'm ready to talk. It wasn't a scream that undid Margot. It was a whisper recorded years ago. The recorder sat between us like it carried a ghost. Megan placed it on Danica's desk with trembling hands, her voice small. It was in Mom's keepsake box. I never thought it worked, but I pressed play. She trailed off, not looking at me. I didn't push. I only reached for the device with fingers that barely felt real and pressed it into the table, as if grounding it would somehow ground me. Danica adjusted her glasses, eyes narrowing. Let's hear it. The static crackled for a second, then silence. Then a voice. Calm, deliberate, unmistakably, Margot. She'll never notice. Rachel doesn't even check the statements. The money's moved. Richard signed it without looking. The breath left my lungs so fast I thought I might faint. Danica froze mid-note, her pen still hovering over the legal pad. Megan sat perfectly still like a child bracing for punishment. The recording continued, fragments mostly. Downtown condos in the trust now. She can cry all she wants, it won't change paper. A laugh, soft, cold. Danica looked up slowly. We submit this. Today. Megan didn't speak for a moment. Then I'll sign an affidavit. I'll say when and where I found it. But I'm not testifying. I won't sit in that room. You won't have to? Danica said crisply. I didn't say thank you. I just nodded once. Took you long enough. Megan flinched. I didn't regret the words. That night, I sat on the cabin porch with the recorder in my lap. I played the tape again, softer this time, letting it thread through the dark. The rain tapped the roof like a metronome. I pressed my hand to my chest, trying to steady something inside me that wouldn't calm. This wasn't revenge. This was revelation. By morning, Danica had already drafted a supplemental evidence submission. The audio clip would be introduced under the intent and undue influence clause. Megan's signed affidavit was attached, notarized, and time-stamped. Danica didn't smile when she handed me the file. This is a pivot, Rachel. The court will subpoena Margot for response. That gives us leverage. But it also means she'll come for blood. Let her, I said, voice low. She'll have to dig through truth to find mine. The hearing was smaller this time, a preliminary evidentiary review before full arguments resumed. Judge Kelly took the bench with his usual granite expression, but I saw the way his eyes lingered on the sealed envelope Danica passed forward. Danica stood. Your Honor, we request this recording be entered into the record. Voice authentication confirmed. It contains direct admissions of financial misrepresentation, signed authorization without informed consent, and deliberate concealment of asset movement. Margot's attorney, a man named Harwell, blanched as he read the summary. We request a recess to evaluate its relevance. You'll have time, Judge Kelly said firmly. But this stays. It will be reviewed in full. Margot sat rigidly beside him, her hands clenched, knuckles white. The tape hadn't even played aloud in court yet, and already she looked like someone cornered. Danica sat down beside me, whispering, "We don't need volume. Let them sweat in silence." I stared straight ahead. I didn't smile. After the session adjourned, I walked slowly through the marble hallway. The courthouse buzzed around me, voices, footsteps, the occasional rustle of legal briefs. But I felt outside of it, suspended in something heavier. I'd thought this moment would feel like triumph. It didn't. It felt like truth rising from the dirt, stubborn and undeniable. My phone buzzed. I pulled it from my coat pocket, expecting a text from Danica or Megan, but it was a call from him, Dad. For the first time in weeks, my thumb hovered, then I tapped accept and held the phone to my ear without a word. His voice came through the line, older than I remembered, worn down. "What do you want from us?" They built their tower on silence. Truth was the earthquake. The courtroom wasn't tense anymore. It was exposed. Judge Kelly's voice sliced through the morning air like a gavel before it even struck. "This court accepts the submitted evidence into the official probate record," she announced without hesitation. That single sentence opened the floodgates. Danica stood with perfect posture, her tone even and razor sharp. "Your Honor, this evidence includes a verified audio recording in which the respondent, Margot Ellison, explicitly references moving assets behind the decedent's back with the knowledge and passive participation of Richard Caldwell." She handed over a supplemental binder with a precision that made it feel like delivering a verdict, not a motion. I didn't look at Margot, but I could feel her unraveling. Her attorney reached out subtly, but enough for me to see it as if to still her hands. She refused to meet my gaze. The judge didn't need drama. The facts did the work. By noon, we had entered formal probate dispute proceedings. All financial and property transfers executed after Naomi Caldwell's death are hereby frozen, Judge Kelly ruled, pending further forensic review. Outside Portland's air buzzed with news. We barely made it past the courthouse steps before flashes began, reporters, bloggers, even a podcaster with a mic taped to a selfie stick. Danica pulled me into a waiting car, shielding my face without touching it. "Let them record the storm," she said. "We'll give them the thunder later." Back at her office, Margot's empire was already tilting. Calls flooded in. First, the Lakeside Historical Board requested her resignation pending investigation. By dusk, 2 of her business associates posted statements of disassociation online. Local news featured her photo under the headline, "Charity Chair Accused in Estate Misappropriation Case." I didn't click the article. I didn't need to see their words. I already knew mine were finally being heard. My phone didn't stop. Old cousins, friends from high school, even distant aunts I hadn't heard from in a decade. "You were right. I'm sorry I didn't believe you sooner. Do you need anything?" Each message made my throat tighten, but none made me feel vindicated. Not really. That emotion never came. I didn't want their pity. I wanted the truth where everyone could see it. That was enough. But one message, one attachment did get to me. From Megan. No subject, no body text. Just a scan of a birthday card. It was hand-drawn by our mother, probably, when I was a teenager. A wobbly sun in the corner, some faded marker streaks. Inside, in Naomi's handwriting, "To my strongest girl. Always fight for what's right, even when it's hard. Love, Mom." I closed my laptop and sat very still, the card's image burning into memory like sunlight on film. No tears came, just breath. Then, resolve. Richard called that evening. I didn't answer. The voicemail was shaky. "Rachel." I didn't know everything. I signed what Margot gave me. I didn't ask. I should have. I just wanted things quiet, but I didn't think it would go this far. He didn't say sorry, just silence. Then a click. When I returned to the cabin, Danica was already there. Her coat still damp from rain papers, spread out like an evidence mosaic on the kitchen table. "They've offered to settle," she said, eyes fixed on a single folder. My heart didn't race. It slowed. Settle confidential financial agreement. No blame. No admission of wrongdoing. Just money. "And what did you say?" Danica looked up. I said no. "We're not here to be paid off. We're here to set the record straight." I sank into the chair across from her. The journal I'd filled with scribbled nights sat heavy in my lap. "I don't want hush money," I said quietly. "I want her name next to the truth. In the court record. For good." Danica nodded. Then we pressed forward. With everything. We didn't toast. We didn't smile. We worked. We organized, redacted, and revised. We reviewed affidavits and timelines. We cross-checked the recorder's authenticity, the notary stamps on property filings, and the text message timestamps. Evidence, not outrage, was our armor. That night, as the lake stilled under a crescent moon, I steeped tea and opened my inbox one last time. A new message sat waiting. Subject: Interview Inquiry. "Ms. Caldwell, we're preparing a feature on contested inheritance and abuse of power within family estates. Would you be open to telling your side? They used to call me a mistake. Now they whisper my name with caution. The garden had overgrown, but the soil still knew my mother's hands." I knelt on the edge of the porch, pulling weeds with quiet resolve, sinking new roots beside the old ones. Lavender and foxglove, her favorites. My fingers were caked with earth nails chipped, but I didn't care. This wasn't about appearances. It was about remembrance. She'd hum, when she worked out here, a half song I never knew the name of. Now, I hummed it too patchy and off-key. It didn't matter. I wasn't trying to recreate her. I was trying to honor her. When I looked up, the lake mirrored a perfect stillness I hadn't seen in weeks. Danica called at 3:17 p.m. The number blinked on my screen, but I already knew. There was a weight in the air, like a storm that had passed but left the world changed. "We won," she said, her voice softer than usual. "The court reinstated the original will. It's over." I didn't jump, didn't cry, didn't scream. I just whispered, "Okay." Then I sat on the porch step and let the sun warm my arms. For the first time since the eviction, I felt like I was back inside my own body. Celeste texted, minutes later, a string of exclamation points, and I told you, justice has a long memory. I smiled, but didn't reply. Not yet. Some moments ask for silence. Megan didn't call. I didn't expect her to. She'd done enough by stepping aside. Some bridges don't need burning, they just need distance. I'd carry her part of the story gently, but I wouldn't carry her weight anymore. The reporter followed up by email. "Would you be open to a full feature on your experience? We think it could help other women facing estate manipulation." I hovered over the reply box, then closed the tab. Let the record speak. I don't need a headline. That night, I drove into town and opened a savings account in my mother's name. Not mine, hers. I set up a monthly transfer to a local shelter she used to volunteer at, the one with peeling walls and proud women inside. I remembered her saying once, "We give what we can, and when we can't, we show up anyway." At Danica's office the next morning, everything looked different. Or maybe I did. The folder was thick exhibits, declarations, notarized acknowledgments. Danica handed it over with the kind of smile you only wear when you've both survived something too big to name. "Rachel Caldwell, rightful heir," she read aloud. My name didn't sound borrowed anymore. I took the pen, clicked it once, and signed without shaking. It wasn't a signature of victory. It was of return, of rightful place, of reclamation. Danica offered a glass of something celebratory, but I declined. "I think I want to go home." "Not the estate? The real one." She nodded. "Go." Back at the cabin, I sat by the fire as the sun set. The emerald ring was on the table beside me, not as a symbol of war, but as a keepsake of endurance. I didn't need to wear it anymore. It had already done its part. I opened my journal, cracked the spine once more, and let my pen glide across the page. They gave everything to Margot, and I took it back without screaming. They once erased me with silence. I answered with a signature. The sunrise spilled soft gold across the lake, wrapping the porch in a glow so gentle it made the cabin look like it belonged to a story, not a war. I sat with my knees pulled up, the wool throw tucked around me, a pen in one hand, and a journal cracked open on my lap. My breath curled in the morning chill. I hadn't slept much, not out of restlessness, but because peace, when it finally comes, feels unfamiliar. too quiet, too undemanding. Dear Mom, I wrote I didn't fight for the house. I fought for your truth. I paused, listening to the low creak of the wood beneath my chair, the occasional flap of birds waking in the branches overhead. The stillness didn't ache anymore. It held me. I'd spent months clawing through silenced legal filings, forged documents, slanderous whispers, and the weight of family wounds that never really scarred over. Now I held no trophy, just a pen. A name cleared, a truth reclaimed, and that was more than enough. I kept writing. They tried to turn your legacy into leverage, your kindness into a ledger of debts they could exploit. But I remembered what you said about the lake, about the cabin. If you ever get lost, you told me, follow the lake. I did, and somehow it led me back to myself. A soft vibration nudged the edge of my piece. My phone lit up with a message from Celeste. You coming to the lake later? I smiled and typed, already here. The screen dimmed. I flipped it face down. Some messages didn't need replies. Some were answered simply by presence. I folded the letter, its edges warm from the sun. I reached into the old college folder tucked in the bench's storage drawer, faded blue cracked at the corners. I slipped the letter in. It joined old report cards, a wrinkled flyer from my first gallery opening, and a dried petal my mother once pressed between pages. I closed the folder gently, like shutting a door with love instead of finality. The porch creaked again. Derek set a mug beside me. Black coffee, no sugar, just the way I'd started to like it. He didn't say anything. He knew better than to interrupt a moment that wasn't quite done forming. I didn't look up. I just let the steam wrap my face and closed my eyes. Somewhere inside, I thought of Megan. I hadn't heard from her since the ruling. Maybe one day I would. Or maybe that silence was hers to keep now. We all choose what we can carry. I chose peace. I chose not to write her name in this letter, not out of anger, but because some truths don't require rehearsal anymore. They just live in the past where they belong. The journal lay open again beside me. I wrote, some battles aren't loud. Some victories are peace. I set the pen down. The wind picked up slightly, just enough to lift the edge of the folded letter. I pressed it back down with the flat of my palm, let it stay closed. And I smiled not with triumph, not with pride, but with something quieter, like the lake itself, a stillness earned. If you've walked beside me through these pages, then you know this wasn't just a fight for property. It was a fight for dignity, for truth. I didn't raise my voice, but I never lowered my worth. I didn't get the justice I dreamed of by screaming. I got it by refusing to disappear. So if my story moved you, if you saw pieces of your own silence in mine, then I ask you, don't let that silence win. Comment. Not just for me, but for every person erased by those they trusted most. Remind the world that quiet strength is still strength. And if life ever corners, you remember this: I started with nothing but a ring, a key, and my mother's memory. You don't need to have everything to begin again. You just need to believe that your voice, however soft, still matters. Support those who fight without a spotlight. Stand beside those reclaiming what was stolen in the dark. Because healing doesn't always come in applause. Sometimes it's a journal entry, a signature, a flower planted where pain once lived. And sometimes it's you reading, remembering, refusing to forget me.